What if the entire US economy was just hours away from collapse, and only one man could stop it? Not a president, not Congress, not even the Federal Reserve. In 1907, a silent financial disaster swept through New York. Banks failed, millions panicked. But one aging banker took control of the chaos. His name was J.P. Morgan, and he may have saved the nation. Yet today, almost no one knows how. Stay until the end to uncover the deal he struck in a locked room that changed American finance forever. But before we dive in, let me know if you're enjoying this kind of history. Tap that like button and subscribe. Only if you truly love what I'm doing here. Part 1. Storm Without Warning. At the turn of the 20th century, America looked unstoppable. The railroads stretched across the nation. Factories belched smoke in every major city. Wealth poured in from steel, oil, and industry. But beneath all that growth was a dangerously fragile financial system. There was no Federal Reserve, no central bank, no one to step in when things went wrong. Instead, the system was held together by private bankers, informal alliances, and a whole lot of optimism. Booms were followed by busts, and the government mostly stayed out of the way. Money moved through a patchwork of banks, many of them small and poorly regulated. With the economy growing so fast, few cared. But it was a house of cards built on loans, trust, and speculation. And no one knew how close it was to falling. Not yet, but the storm was coming. And when it hit, it would shake the entire country to its core. The newest and flashiest players in this system were the trust companies. Unlike traditional banks, they didn't take deposits in the same way or follow the same strict rules. They operated in a gray zone, technically legal but barely supervised. These firms exploded in popularity during the early 1900s. They offered high returns, invested in risky ventures, and attracted the growing middle class with promises of easy profits. It was modern finance before anyone knew how dangerous modern finance could be. These trusts became deeply connected to Wall Street, financing stocks, loans, and massive corporate deals. But they were also vulnerable. If customers got scared and demanded their money, the trust companies didn't have enough cash to pay everyone. And because no one was watching them closely, no one really knew how bad things were, until it was too late. In this uncertain landscape, the wrong move by the wrong person could start a chain reaction. And in 1907, that's exactly what happened. Started small. A banker named F. Augustus Hines, ambitious, reckless, and largely unknown outside of Wall Street, tried to corner the market on a company called United Copper. It was a bold plan. If he could buy up enough shares, he could control the price and make a fortune. But the scheme collapsed in just days. Investors panicked, rumors swirled. If Hines was going down, who else was tied to him? Which banks, which trust companies? Suddenly, fear spread like fire. Customers rushed to pull their money out of institutions connected to Hines, even ones that were financially sound. But panic doesn't care about the truth. The Knickerbocker Trust, one of the largest in New York, faced a wave of withdrawals it couldn't handle. When it closed its doors, the real panic began. Banks started falling like dominoes. The stock market trembled. Business confidence vanished. And with no government safety net, the entire financial system was left to fend for itself. As the chaos spread, all eyes turned to one man. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a government official. He was a private banker, an aging titan named John Pierpont Morgan. By 1907, J.P. Morgan was already a legend. He had financed railroads, stabilized markets, and helped build America's industrial empire. But he was slowing down. In his 70s, with deep lines etched into his face and a nose twisted from a childhood skin disease, he had stepped back from daily operations. Others now ran the show on Wall Street. Yet when the panic hit, those same men came knocking on his door. Because Morgan still had what no one else did, unmatched credibility. When he backed something, the markets listened. When he spoke, other bankers fell in line. And in that moment, the country didn't need a title or a vote. It needed someone who could act fast, take control, and hold the line. Morgan saw the danger immediately. He didn't need a committee or a memo to understand what was at stake. If the panic continued, it wouldn't just be banks and stocks that failed. It would be businesses, jobs, entire cities. Breadlines could stretch down streets. Chaos could break out in places far beyond Wall Street. There was no playbook, no safety valve, and most frightening of all, there was no one else coming to help. Morgan understood that he was the only person with enough influence and money to organize a rescue. But even he couldn't do it alone. He would need to pull together the warring factions of Wall Street, force them to cooperate, and inject liquidity into a system that was hemorrhaging confidence by the hour. It was a race against time. And as the crisis deepened, one question hung in the air. Could one man really stop a nationwide collapse? Part 2: One Man versus the Collapse. J.P. Morgan didn't wait. As panic rippled through Wall Street, he summoned New York's most powerful bankers to his private library. Heavy oak doors closed behind them. The outside world was falling apart, but inside, Morgan took charge. This wasn't a government meeting. It was a rescue operation led by a private citizen. The old man laid out the stakes. Banks were failing by the hour. If nothing was done, the financial system would collapse. He didn't ask for volunteers. He gave assignments. Some would inspect trust companies overnight. Others would gather funds to prop them up. Morgan's study became the nation's command center. There was no official authority behind it, only Morgan's reputation and an unspoken understanding. Everyone in that room knew, if he didn't act, no one would. By nightfall, the library was filled with smoke, papers, and exhausted men. Outside, New York trembled. Inside, America's economic survival was now running on one man's willpower. The trust companies were bleeding. Depositors flooded the lobbies, demanding their savings. Rumors fed the panic. If one trust failed, others would follow. Morgan's solution was swift and cold. He sent teams of auditors to inspect each company's books overnight. The next morning, he alone would decide which were solvent and which weren't. Only the healthy ones would get help. No time for second chances. In the following days, he raised millions from rival banks. Money not willingly given, but demanded. He pressured, pushed, and at times threatened. When one bank hesitated, he reminded them that if the system failed, their fortunes would vanish too. He was orchestrating what no government could, a coordinated multi-million-dollar bailout. One trust company at a time, he plugged the leaks. But the panic was relentless. Each fix bought time but didn't end the storm. Every hour brought a new crisis. Morgan worked without rest. The pressure was unimaginable, and the worst was still coming. As the banks teetered, another disaster loomed. The New York Stock Exchange was on the edge of collapse. With so many institutions pulling out money, the entire market was drying up. Brokers were about to default. If the exchange closed, it would signal complete financial failure. Morgan knew the signal that would send to the nation, so he moved again. He called the banks together one more time and demanded an immediate injection of cash. Millions of dollars. They resisted, he insisted, and at the last possible moment, the funds arrived. The exchange stayed open. It was a close call, so close that traders were already preparing for shutdown. But Morgan's timing once again held the line. Still, this wasn't victory. People across the city were still in panic. Banks were overwhelmed with crowds. Businesses held their breath. For ordinary Americans, the collapse felt like it was already happening. Morgan could fix the money, but not the fear. At his house, sleep was a distant memory. Morgan's mansion became a financial war room. Bankers, lawyers, and accountants came in shifts. Meals were skipped. Men collapsed from exhaustion. And Morgan, already elderly, stayed upright, calm, and focused. He issued orders like a general in the trenches. Every move was calculated. Every dollar accounted for. He understood something others didn't. This was no ordinary crash. This was systemic. The wrong failure would topple everything. And despite his efforts, the crisis was not ending. It was only mutating. One rescue led to another need. Each solution bought only hours. The financial system was a boat full of holes, and Morgan was bailing water faster than anyone thought humanly possible. Those around him admired and feared him in equal measure. He was iron-willed, severe, even cold. But in the fire, he was the only man who didn't blink. And then came the moment that chilled even Morgan's blood. Another institution was failing, bigger than any before. The Trust Company of America, one of the largest and most visible financial firms in New York, was buckling under pressure. Depositors lined the streets. Withdrawals were massive. The company was out of cash and fast. If this trust collapsed, it would signal total failure. The panic would become a full-scale run on the banking system. Everything Morgan had done would unravel in hours. This wasn't just another leak. This was the dam breaking, and it would require more than meetings and speeches. Morgan would have to make a move so bold and so dangerous that no one else would even dare attempt it. What he did next would define the crisis. And in that moment, even his closest allies wondered. Could he pull off one more miracle before the whole country slipped into financial darkness? Part 3: The Last-Ditch Gamble. The Trust Company of America was collapsing in real time. People crowded the sidewalks. Cash reserves vanished by the hour. Morgan knew this wasn't just another trust. It was the last pillar holding back total chaos. If it fell, every bank in New York could fall with it. He acted like a battlefield general. No room for debate. He summoned the most powerful bankers to his private library once more. But this time, the tone changed. Morgan locked the doors. No one would leave until they agreed to save the trust. He took their checkbooks, their pride, their fears, and put them under one roof. The men argued, they stalled, they resisted. Morgan said little. But his silence was louder than any speech. He had inspected the trust himself and declared it sound. That was the verdict. Now, the only question was whether the others would follow or let the country fall. The clock ticked. Outside, The crowds waited for answers. As night fell, tension thickened like smoke. The bankers paced, shouted, whispered in corners. But the door stayed closed. Morgan let them exhaust themselves. Then he returned, quiet, stern, holding a document. The terms were final. A multi-million-dollar rescue package, split among them. No adjustments, no discussion. He placed the paper on the table and stepped back. No speech, just a quiet demand wrapped in silence. The room went still. After long minutes, the first signature was scribbled down. Then another and another. In that moment, the resistance cracked. Not because they were convinced, but because they were cornered. Morgan had made it clear. There was no plan B. And the weight of inaction was heavier than the price of surrender. One by one, the titans of Wall Street gave in. A deal was struck. Not in a courtroom, not in Congress, but in the dim glow of Morgan's library, behind doors bolted shut from the inside. The next morning, the Trust Company of America reopened. The money arrived, depositors calmed. The run stopped. Slowly, confidence returned. Banks reopened. Stocks stabilized. Panic faded into a whisper. J.P. Morgan had held the system together with nothing but personal power, iron resolve, and relentless strategy. But while Wall Street breathed a sigh of relief, public opinion fractured. Some saw him as a savior. Others saw a terrifying truth. The fate of the entire U.S. economy had rested in the hands of a single private banker. Unelected, untouchable, unaccountable. The sheer scale of Morgan's power shocked the nation. If he had failed, or if he had chosen not to act, the United States might have plunged into depression years earlier than 1929. And that thought haunted even his admirers. The panic had been stopped, but something deeper had been revealed. The system needed a backbone, one that didn't rely on the will of a single man. In the years that followed, Washington took notice. The panic of 1907 became the final wake-up call. Congress launched investigations. Economists debated solutions. And in 1913, the Federal Reserve was born, a centralized, government-backed system designed to prevent future disasters. It would have the power Morgan once had to organize rescues, inject liquidity, and calm markets. But Morgan's name faded quickly. He died months before the Fed opened its doors. His private empire was eventually dismantled under antitrust laws. And history marched on. Textbooks rarely mention that in 1907, the U.S. government did nothing, and one man, through sheer force of will, held off collapse. He wasn't thanked, he wasn't celebrated. He was too powerful to be admired, too rich to be pitied, and too complicated to become a hero. But without J.P. Morgan, the American financial system might have shattered before it was ever built strong enough to survive. He wasn't elected. He had no official power. But in the darkest moment of American finance, J.P. Morgan saved the nation. And he did it behind closed doors.